The stagecoach lurched to a sudden halt that sent Willa Jane sprawling across the seat, her carpetbag tumbling to the floor and spilling its contents across the dusty wooden planks. Through the window, she glimpsed wooden buildings that looked nothing like the prosperous mining town described in Theodore Martin's letters, and her stomach twisted with a sickening dread that told her something had gone terribly wrong. "Clearwater Creek, Wyoming territory," the driver shouted down, already tossing luggage from the roof. 20-minute stop for water and provisions. Willa's heart plummeted. Wyoming territory. She was supposed to be in Sheridan, Montana territory, meeting the man who had sent for her as his mail-order bride. Panic seized her chest as she scrambled to gather her scattered belongings, her fingers fumbling with hairpins and the small daguerreotype of her late mother that had rolled beneath the opposite bench. "Excuse me," she called out, sticking her head through the window. "Driver, I believe there has been a mistake. I am supposed to continue to Sheridan." The grizzled man scratched his beard and spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "This coach goes to Laramie, miss. You want Sheridan, you should have taken the northbound stage out of Cheyenne." "But the ticket agent said," Willa began, then stopped as the horrible realization dawned. She had been so nervous, so flustered by the enormity of what she was doing, traveling halfway across the country to marry a stranger, that she must have misheard the instructions, or perhaps the ticket agent had misunderstood her destination. The crowded station in Cheyenne had been chaotic, filled with the noise of a dozen different conversations, the whistle of trains and the clatter of wagons. "I cannot go to Laramie," she said, hearing the desperation creeping into her voice. "I must get to Sheridan. When is the next coach north?" The driver pulled out a tattered schedule from his coat pocket and squinted at it. "Next northbound does not come through for 5 days, and that is if the weather holds. Been having trouble with road washouts up that way. 5 days. Theodore Martin would be waiting at the station in Sheridan today, expecting to meet his bride. She had no way to send word, no way to explain. He would think she had changed her mind, that she had taken his money for the ticket and decided not to come. The thought made her cheeks burn with shame, even though the mistake had been honest. "Is there no other way?" she asked. "A freight wagon, perhaps, or not unless you can sprout wings and fly," the driver said, not unkindly. "Clearwater Creek is not exactly on the main routes. Most folks do not come here unless they live here. You are welcome to stay on to Laramie, but from there you would still have to backtrack." Willa climbed down from the coach on shaking legs, her mind racing through impossible calculations. She had exactly $8.35 to her name, the remainder of what she had saved from 3 years of working as a seamstress in Philadelphia after her father died and left her with nothing but debts. The ticket to Montana had consumed most of her funds. She certainly did not have enough to arrange private transport or to wait 5 days in a hotel, assuming this tiny settlement even had such an establishment. The other passengers disembarked, stretching their legs and heading toward the building that served as both stagecoach station and general store. Willa stood alone on the dusty street, her dark blue traveling dress already showing the signs of 2 days of hard travel, her auburn hair escaping from its pins despite her best efforts to maintain some dignity. Clearwater Creek consisted of perhaps 24 buildings scattered along a single main street. She could see a blacksmith shop, a livery stable, what appeared to be a saloon, and a few other structures she could not identify from this distance. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow even though it was late May of 1882. The air smelled of pine and sage, so different from the coal smoke and sewage of Philadelphia that for a moment Willa felt as though she had stepped onto another planet entirely. 20 minutes, the driver reminded her. Make your choice soon, miss. Willa picked up her carpetbag and her small trunk, struggling with the weight of the latter, and moved them away from the coach. She could not go on to Laramie. It made no sense. Somehow, she would have to find a way north to Sheridan, or at least find a way to send word to Theodore Martin explaining what had happened. She was standing there, fighting back tears of frustration and fear, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. A man on a bay mare rode down the street and stopped near the stagecoach, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn Stetson, and even from a distance, Willa could see that his sun-browned face had strong, honest features. He wore the practical clothing of a working ranch hand: faded denim trousers, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a vest that had seen better days. He tied his horse to the hitching post and headed into the general store, barely glancing at Willa as he passed. She forced herself to take a deep breath and consider her options. She could ask inside if there was anyone traveling north, perhaps offer to pay for passage. It was her only real choice besides sitting here and watching her entire future crumble around her. The stagecoach driver had already gone inside, probably to arrange for the team change and grab whatever passed for coffee in this isolated place. Willa lifted her carpetbag and left the trunk where it sat, not wanting to drag it inside only to have to drag it out again. The door to the general store stuck slightly, swollen with moisture, and she had to push hard to get it open. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from flour and coffee to rope and ammunition. A pot-bellied stove sat cold and dark in one corner. Behind the counter stood a man who must have been the proprietor, middle-aged and balding, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. The cowboy who had ridden up stood at the counter, apparently placing an order. "I need the wire mended properly this time, Carl," the cowboy was saying, his voice a pleasant baritone. "Last batch you sold me did not hold worth a damn." "That wire came from the same supplier I have always used, Henry," Carl replied. "If it did not hold, maybe you need to check your fence posts." The cowboy, Henry, shook his head. "My posts are solid. Just get me the good wire and I will need about 200 feet of it." "Going to take a couple days to get that much in," Carl said, making a note in a ledger. "Can you wait that long? Do not have much choice. The cattle are not going to wait for better fencing." Henry's tone was resigned but good-natured. Willa cleared her throat softly, not wanting to interrupt but desperate to ask her questions. Both men turned to look at her, and she felt her cheeks warm under their scrutiny. "May I help you, miss?" Carl asked, his expression shifting to one of confusion. "Are you on the stage?" "I am, or I was, but I seem to have gotten on the wrong one in Cheyenne." Willa set down her carpetbag and clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. "I need to get to Sheridan, Montana Territory." "Is there anyone here who might be traveling that direction, or is there a way to send a telegram?" Carl scratched his head. "No telegraph office here, I am afraid. Nearest one is back in Cheyenne or over in Laramie. As for anyone heading to Montana, well, that is quite a ways north. Most folks around here have no call to go that far." "I see." Willa's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Is there a hotel where I might stay until the next stage comes through?" "We have a boarding house," Carl said slowly. "Mrs. Henderson takes in the occasional traveler. But I heard her say just yesterday that she is full up with some mining engineers who are surveying the hills east of here." The hope that had been struggling to stay alive in Willa's chest finally guttered out. She stood there, fighting the urge to simply sit down on the floor and weep. Everything she owned was in that trunk outside and the bag at her feet. She had no family, no friends within 1,000 miles, and she was stranded in a town so small it did not even warrant a telegraph office. Henry Vance had been watching this exchange with growing interest. He had come into town for supplies, expecting nothing more than the usual tedious business of ranching, and instead found himself looking at a woman who was clearly in distress. She was pretty, he noted almost absently, with fine features and intelligent eyes that shone with unshed tears. But more than her appearance, something about her situation struck him deeply. She looked lost and alone, and some instinct he did not fully understand made him want to help her. "Pardon me, miss," he said, stepping closer. "I could not help but overhear. You are trying to get to Sheridan." Willa turned to him, and up close she could see that his eyes were a warm brown, creased at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. He had a kind face, she thought, though weathered and strong-jawed in the way of men who worked outdoors. "Yes," she said. "I am supposed to meet someone there, but I took the wrong coach, and now I am stranded here with no way to send word or to continue my journey for at least 5 days." "What is in Sheridan, if you do not mind me asking?" Henry asked, keeping his voice gentle. Willa hesitated, then decided that her circumstances were desperate enough to warrant honesty. "I am a mail-order bride. The gentleman who sent for me will be waiting at the station today, and when I do not arrive, he will think I have abandoned the arrangement." Henry absorbed this information with a thoughtful expression. A mail-order bride. He had heard of such arrangements, of course. The West was full of men seeking wives and women back east seeking security or adventure or escape from difficult circumstances. He had never seriously considered sending for a bride himself, despite his mother's frequent suggestions that he needed to marry and provide her with grandchildren. "That is unfortunate," he said, and meant it. "Carl is right that most folks here do not have cause to go to Montana, but I might be able to help you get word to this man, at least. My ranch is about 8 miles north of here, and we are close enough to the Montana border that our supply wagons sometimes go up that way. My foreman might know of someone heading to Sheridan." "You would do that?" Willa asked, hardly daring to hope. "It seems like the decent thing to do," Henry said with a slight smile, "though I cannot promise anything. Best I can offer is to take you back to the ranch and see what we can work out. At the very least, my mother will not turn away someone in need of a place to stay while we figure this out." Carl had been listening to this exchange with interest. "That is mighty kind of you, Henry. The girl looks about ready to fall over." Willa wanted to protest that she was perfectly fine, but the truth was that she felt exhausted and overwhelmed. The offer of help, any help, was more than she had dared to hope for. "I do not want to impose," she began, but Henry waved off her concern. "It is no imposition. We have plenty of room and my mother loves having company. Let me finish my business here and then we can collect your things and head out." The stagecoach driver poked his head through the door at that moment. "5 minutes, miss. You staying or going?" Willa looked at Henry Vance, at his open, honest face and the kindness in his eyes, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I am staying." The driver shrugged and disappeared. Willa heard the sounds of the team being readied and the other passengers boarding. Within minutes, the coach pulled away in a cloud of dust, taking with it her last easy connection to the life she had planned. Henry finished placing his order with Carl, arranging for the wire to be held until he could return for it. Then he helped Willa carry her trunk and carpetbag out to where his horse waited. The trunk was too heavy and awkward to manage easily on horseback, so Carl offered the use of his small wagon, which Henry could return the next time he came to town. "I appreciate this more than I can say," Willa told Henry as he loaded her belongings into the wagon bed. "You must think me very foolish, taking the wrong stage." "I think mistakes happen," Henry said, "especially when a person is nervous or tired." "You have traveled a long way from Pennsylvania, have you not? I can hear it in your voice." "Philadelphia," Willa confirmed, surprised that he had identified her origins so easily. "Is it very obvious?" "Only to someone who pays attention," Henry said. He secured the trunk with a length of rope, then offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong but careful. "My mother is from Boston originally, so I grew up hearing that Eastern way of talking. It sounds like home to me." Willa settled onto the hard wooden seat, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Henry unhitched his mare and tied her to the back of the wagon, then climbed up beside Willa and took the reins. The wagon jerked into motion, and they began the journey north out of Clearwater Creek. The landscape opened up around them as they left the small settlement behind. Rolling grassland stretched in every direction, dotted with sage and the occasional stand of pine. The mountains loomed larger here, their presence both beautiful and intimidating. Willa had never seen such open space, such vast sky. In Philadelphia, buildings had hemmed her in on all sides. Here, she felt exposed and tiny, a speck of humanity in an endless wilderness. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to fill the silence. "All my life," Henry said, guiding the horses along a rutted track that passed for a road. "My father started the ranch when Montana and Wyoming were still just territories with barely any law to speak of. He built the house himself, with help from some of the local Crow people who were friendly. That was before things got bad with the tribes, before the government started pushing everyone onto reservations." "It must have been very difficult," Willa said, hearing the note of old pain in his voice. "It was hard times for everyone," Henry agreed. "My father did his best to treat people fairly, regardless of where they came from. He died 5 years ago, and I have been running the ranch since then. It is just me and my mother now, plus the hands we hire on." "I am sorry for your loss," Willa said softly. "Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching and about treating people right." Henry glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "What about you? What made you decide to become a mail-order bride?" Willa looked down at her hands folded in her lap. It was not an easy story to tell, but Henry had been nothing but kind, and she felt she owed him some explanation. "My father died 3 years ago," she began. "He had been a teacher, but he was not very good with money. When he passed, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The house was sold to cover what he owed, and I was left with almost nothing. I found work as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough to rent a room and buy food. I saw an advertisement for men seeking wives in the West, and it seemed like a chance for a better life. And this Theodore Martin, he seemed like a good prospect. His letters were very proper and kind," Willa said. "He runs a mining supply business in Sheridan, and he has a house and some standing in the community. He seemed respectable and honest. I thought perhaps we could build a good life together, even if we did not start out with romantic feelings." Henry nodded slowly, understanding the practicality of such arrangements even as something in him twisted uncomfortably at the thought of this woman marrying a stranger for security. "It is a sensible approach," he said carefully. "Though I hope this Martin fellow appreciates his good fortune if and when you do manage to reach him." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the clopping of hooves, and the ever-present wind rushing through the grass. Willa found herself stealing glances at Henry, when she thought he was not looking. He sat easy in the seat, his hands relaxed on the reins, clearly a man comfortable in his own skin and his environment. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safer than she had felt since leaving Philadelphia. "Tell me about your ranch," she said eventually, wanting to know more about the place where she would be staying. Henry's face brightened slightly, the way it always did when he talked about the land he loved. "We run about 500 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. Good beef stock. We have water rights to a creek that runs through the property year-round, which is more valuable than gold in this country. The house is nothing fancy, but it is solid and comfortable. My mother keeps a garden that somehow manages to produce vegetables despite the short growing season. We have a few good hands who have been with us for years." "It sounds peaceful," Willa said and meant it. "It can be," Henry allowed. "It is also hard work from dawn to dusk most days, and the winters are brutal, but I cannot imagine living anywhere else. This land gets into your blood." As they traveled, Henry pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation that marked the boundary of his property, a stand of cottonwoods that indicated a hidden spring, the distant smudge that was a neighbor's ranch house. Willa tried to memorize it all, though she knew she would be hopelessly lost if she tried to find her way back to Clearwater Creek on her own. The sun was well past its zenith when they crested a rise, and Willa got her first view of the Vance ranch. The house sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding hills. It was a sturdy structure of logs and lumber, 2 stories tall with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the landscape. A large barn, a corral with several horses, a bunkhouse, and various sheds and storage structures. "There it is," Henry said, and Willa could hear the pride in his voice. "Home." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun to see who was arriving. She was perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s, with dark hair liberally streaked with gray, pulled back into a neat bun. Even from a distance, Willa could see that she carried herself with a certain grace and dignity. Henry pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Willa descend. His mother was already approaching, her expression curious but welcoming. "Henry, I did not expect you back so soon," she said, then her eyes fell on Willa. "And you have brought a guest." "Mother, this is Miss Willa Jane. She had some trouble with the stage in Clearwater Creek and needs a place to stay while we help her sort out her travel plans." "Miss Jane, this is my mother, Iris Vance." Iris's gaze was sharp and assessing, but not unkind. She took in Willa's rumpled traveling dress, her tired face and the strain evident in her posture, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "You are very welcome here, Miss Jane," Iris said warmly. "Please, come inside. You look exhausted, and I imagine you could use a good meal and a chance to wash the dust off." "You are very kind," Willa said, feeling tears threaten again at this unexpected hospitality. "I do not want to be a burden." "Nonsense," Iris said firmly. "We are always glad of company out here. It gets lonely with just the 2 of us rattling around in this big house. Come along, and Henry can bring your things." Willa followed Iris into the house while Henry began unloading the wagon. The interior was as solid and comfortable as Henry had described, with sturdy furniture and touches that spoke of a woman's care. Curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on the table, books on a shelf near the fireplace. It was not fancy, but it was clearly a home, filled with warmth and life. Iris led her upstairs to a small bedroom with a window overlooking the front of the property. The bed was made up with a colorful quilt, and there was a washstand with a pitcher and basin. "I will have Henry bring up your trunk," Iris said. "The water in the pitcher is fresh, and there are towels in that drawer. Come down when you are ready, and we will have some coffee and discuss your situation." Left alone, Willa sank down onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day's events. She had set out that morning thinking she would be in Sheridan by evening, meeting Theodore Martin and beginning her new life. Instead, she was stranded in Wyoming territory, dependent on the kindness of strangers, with no clear path forward. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her. But she had not survived the past 3 years by giving in to despair. She had learned to be resourceful, to adapt, to keep moving forward even when the path seemed impossible. She would find a way through this, just as she had found a way through everything else. After washing her face and hands and attempting to make herself presentable, Willa went back downstairs. She found Henry and Iris in the kitchen, a large room that seemed to be the heart of the house. The smell of coffee filled the air, and Iris was setting out slices of bread and butter. "Sit down, my dear," Iris said, gesturing to the table. "You must be famished." As they sat together, Willa explained the situation in more detail, how she had responded to Theodore Martin's advertisement, the exchange of letters that had followed, the arrangements for her journey west. She showed them the latest letter from Theodore, which specified the date and time he would meet her in Sheridan. "That was today," Willa said, her voice tight with worry. "He will have gone to the station, and I will not have been there. He will think I changed my mind or took advantage of him." Henry had been reading the letter, his brow furrowed in thought. "This says he works for the Sheridan Mining Supply Company. That is a fair-sized operation from what I have heard. If we can get a message to the company, they should be able to pass it along to him." "But how?" Willa asked. "You said yourself that most people here do not travel that far north." "Most people do not," Henry agreed. "But I have been thinking. We have a big cattle drive coming up in about 2 weeks, moving a herd up to the railhead near Billings. That is north of Sheridan. We could send someone ahead to Sheridan with a message, explain what happened, and tell this Martin fellow where you are." 2 weeks, Willa said slowly. It was better than 5 days waiting for the next stage, but it still felt like an eternity. "What will I do in the meantime?" "You will stay here with us," Iris said firmly. "We can always use an extra pair of hands, and it will give you a chance to rest and recover from your journey before you continue on. Unless you would rather wait in Clearwater Creek for the next stage." "No," Willa said quickly. The thought of going back to that dusty little settlement and trying to find accommodation among strangers held no appeal. Here, at least, she felt welcome. "If you truly do not mind having me, I would be grateful to stay, and I would be happy to help with any work that needs doing. I am a skilled seamstress, and I can cook and clean and do whatever else might be useful." "Then it is settled," Iris said with satisfaction. "You will stay with us, and we will get word to your Mr. Martin as soon as possible. In the meantime, try not to worry too much. If he is a decent man, he will understand that circumstances beyond your control delayed you." Over the next few days, Willa settled into life at the Vance ranch. She helped Iris with the cooking and housework, mended clothes for the ranch hands, and worked in the garden pulling weeds and tending the vegetables. The work was different from what she had done in Philadelphia, more physical and more varied, but she found she did not mind it. There was something satisfying about seeing the direct results of her labor, about working with her hands in ways that produced tangible outcomes. Henry was often away during the day, working with his men to repair fences and move cattle and do the 100 other tasks that ranching required. But in the evenings, he would return to the house for supper, and the 3 of them would sit together and talk. Willa found herself looking forward to these meals, to the easy conversation and the sense of being part of a family, however temporary. She learned that Iris had indeed come from Boston as a young bride, following Henry's father west in search of opportunity. She spoke of those early days with a mixture of nostalgia and humor, describing the hardships they had faced and the way they had built a life together from nothing. "It was not what I imagined when I married him," Iris admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "I thought we would settle in San Francisco or Denver, somewhere with society and culture. Instead, we ended up out here in the middle of nowhere, but I do not regret it. This place gave us a good life, and it gave me Henry." Henry, sitting nearby with his long legs stretched out and his hat pushed back on his head, gave his mother a fond smile. She terrorized the neighboring ranchers' wives with her Boston ways for the first few years. "Tried to start a literary society. And I succeeded," Iris said with dignity. "For 6 months anyway, until the Holcomb family moved back east. After that, there was not enough interest to sustain it." Willa laughed, enjoying the gentle teasing between mother and son. She noticed the way Henry looked at his mother, with obvious affection and respect, and she found herself thinking that Theodore Martin's letters had never mentioned his mother. In fact, they had been curiously devoid of personal details beyond his business and his house. She wondered what kind of family life awaited her in Sheridan, if she ever got there. The thought troubled her more than it should have. According to all logic and practicality, she should be anxious to continue her journey, to fulfill her obligation to Theodore Martin and begin the life she had planned. Instead, she found herself content here, more content than she had been in years. She loved the wide sky and the clean air, the satisfaction of physical work, and most especially the company of Henry and Iris Vance. Henry, for his part, found himself increasingly aware of Willa's presence. He noticed the way the morning light caught in her auburn hair as she worked in the garden. He appreciated her quick laugh and her intelligent conversation. He admired her willingness to work hard and her determination not to be a burden despite her circumstances. More than once, he caught himself watching her when he should have been focused on other things. It was a complication he had not anticipated. When he had offered to help her in Clearwater Creek, it had been a simple act of kindness, nothing more. He had expected to provide temporary assistance and then send her on her way to the man she was supposed to marry. Instead, with each passing day, the thought of Willa leaving grew more difficult to contemplate. On the 5th day of her stay, Henry was working in the barn when Willa appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket. "Your mother sent me with some lunch," she said. "She thought you might be hungry." "That was thoughtful of her," Henry said, setting aside the harness he had been mending. "And of you for bringing it out." Willa set the basket on a hay bale and unpacked it: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a jar of water. They sat together in the cool dimness of the barn, eating in companionable silence for a few minutes. "I want to thank you again," Willa said eventually. "You and your mother have been incredibly kind. I do not know what I would have done without your help." "You would have managed," Henry said confidently. "You are resourceful and strong. You would have found a way." "Perhaps," Willa said, though she did not sound convinced. "But I am grateful I did not have to find out." Henry wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at her seriously. "Miss Jane, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "This Theodore Martin, do you love him?" The question caught Willa off guard. She had expected many things, but not that. "I have never met him," she said carefully. "How could I love him?" "That is not an answer." "No, I suppose it is not." Willa looked down at her hands. "The truth is, I agreed to marry him because it seemed like the best option available to me. A chance for security, for a home, for a life that was better than what I had. I hoped that perhaps affection might grow between us over time, but love, no, I do not love him. And if you found you could not develop those feelings, if you discovered you did not suit each other, What then? I suppose I would have to make the best of it, Willa said. That is what people do, is it not? They make the best of the circumstances they find themselves in. Some people do, Henry agreed. But some people have the courage to choose a different path, even when it is difficult. Willa met his eyes, seeing something there that made her heart beat faster. What are you saying? Henry hesitated, knowing he was about to step over a line that could not be uncrossed. But the words wanted to be said, and he had never been good at hiding his feelings. I am saying that in the 5 days you have been here, I have come to care for you. More than I should, given that you are promised to another man. I am saying that the thought of you leaving to marry a stranger makes me feel like I am making the worst mistake of my life by letting you go. Willa's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the growing connection between them, the way their eyes would meet across the dinner table, the way their hands would brush when passing dishes, the comfortable silences that spoke of a deeper understanding. But she had tried to ignore it, to tell herself it meant nothing because she was committed to another path. Henry, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now, Henry said quickly. I just needed you to know. If you want to continue to Sheridan, if you want to marry Theodore Martin, I will help you get there. I gave you my word, and I will keep it. But if there is any part of you that feels what I feel, if there is any chance you might want to stay here instead, then I am asking you to consider it. I cannot just abandon my commitment, Willa protested, even as her heart soared at his words. Theodore Martin is expecting me. He paid for my passage. It would be wrong to simply not appear without explanation. I agree, Henry said. Which is why we should send word to him as we planned, but in that message, you could tell him the truth. That your circumstances have changed, that you cannot go through with the marriage. It would be difficult, but it would be honest. And what would I do here? Willa asked, needing to understand the practical realities even as her emotions spun in wild circles. I have no money, no prospects. I cannot simply live off your charity. You would not be living off charity, Henry said intently. You would be staying as my wife if you would have me. I know this is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I feel more certain about this than I have felt about anything in years. You belong here, Willa, with me. I can feel it. Willa stood up abruptly, needing to move to think. She walked to the barn door and looked out at the landscape that had become familiar so quickly. The rolling grassland, the distant mountains, the big sky overhead. She thought about Theodore Martin, a man she had never met, whose letters had been proper but impersonal. She thought about Sheridan, a town she had never seen where she knew no one and nothing. Then she thought about Henry, whose kindness had saved her when she was lost. About Iris, who had welcomed her without question. About this ranch, where she had felt more at home in 5 days than she had felt anywhere in the 3 years since her father died. She turned back to find Henry standing right behind her, having followed her to the door. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool barn. I feel it too, she whispered. This connection between us, it terrifies me. It terrifies me as well, Henry admitted. But sometimes the best things in life are terrifying. If I stay, if I choose this, there is no going back. I would be burning every bridge behind me. I know. People will talk. They will say I am fickle, that I am immoral for breaking my promise to one man and running off with another. Let them talk, Henry said. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine and my mother's, and I can tell you right now that my mother likes you better than she has liked anyone I have shown interest in. Despite the seriousness of the moment, Willa found herself smiling. You have shown interest in me. From the moment I saw you standing in front of Carl's store looking lost and brave at the same time, Henry said. I told myself I was just being helpful, just being a decent human being, but the truth is I took one look at you and something inside me said there she is. I know it sounds insane. It does sound insane, Willa agreed, but that does not mean it is wrong. Henry reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. His calloused palm was warm and steady, just as it had been when he helped her down from the stagecoach in Clearwater Creek, just as it had been every time he had offered her assistance in the days since. "Stay with me," he said simply. "Let me court you properly. Let us take time to be sure, but stay. Give this a chance. Give us a chance." Willa looked at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such care, and felt something settle deep in her chest. It was not the desperate calculation of her decision to become a mail-order bride, weighing pros and cons and hoping for the best. It was something quieter and far more certain. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." Henry's face broke into a smile so bright and genuine that Willa felt her heart squeeze. Then he was pulling her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a hug that lifted her off her feet. She laughed, startled and delighted, her hands coming to rest on his broad shoulders. When he set her down, his expression turned serious again. "We need to send word to Theodore Martin right away. It is not fair to keep him waiting any longer than necessary." "I know," Willa said. "I will write to him this afternoon and explain everything. You can send someone to Sheridan with the letter." "I will take it myself," Henry said. "It is too important to trust to anyone else, and it is the least I can do given the circumstances. I caused this situation by convincing you to stay." "You did not cause anything," Willa said firmly. "I made my own choice and I stand by it. But I appreciate your willingness to face him if necessary." They walked back to the house together, and if they held hands along the way, there was no one to see and no reason to hide their feelings any longer. Iris was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when they entered, and she took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "So you have sorted things out, have you?" "How did you know there was anything to sort out?" Henry asked. "Because I have eyes and I am not blind," Iris said tartly. "The two of you have been mooning at each other for days. I was starting to wonder if I would need to lock you in a room together to force a conversation." Willa felt her cheeks heat, but she could not help laughing. "Are we truly that obvious?" "Only to someone who loves her son and wants to see him happy," Iris said, her voice softening. "And you make him happy, my dear. I can see it in his eyes." "She is staying," Henry announced. "If that is all right with you, Mother." "Of course it is all right with me," Iris said. "Now, what are you going to do about the poor man in Sheridan who is expecting a bride?" Henry explained their plan, and Iris nodded approvingly. "That is the right way to handle it. Honest and direct." "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Henry said. "The sooner we clear this up, the better. I should be gone 3 or 4 days, depending on the roads." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Willa spent a long time crafting her letter to Theodore Martin, trying to strike the right tone of apology and explanation without offering false hope. It was one of the most difficult things she had ever written. "Dear Mr. Martin," she began, then scratched it out and started again. "Dear Theodore." That was better, more personal. "I am writing to you with news that I fear will come as a great disappointment. I did not arrive in Sheridan as planned because I took the wrong stage in Cheyenne and ended up stranded in Clearwater Creek, Wyoming territory. A kind rancher and his mother took me in and offered to help me reach you. But in the time I have spent here, my circumstances and feelings have changed. I have come to care deeply for this man, and I have decided to remain here with him rather than continue to Sheridan. I know this is a terrible breach of our agreement, and I can only imagine how you must feel. I am deeply sorry for any embarrassment or inconvenience I have caused you. You deserve a woman who can come to you with an open heart, ready to build a life with you, and I am no longer that woman. I hope you will understand, and that you will be able to find someone better suited to be your wife. Please know that my regard for you based on our correspondence remains, and I wish you every happiness in your future. With sincere apologies and best wishes, Willa Jane. She read it over several times, making small changes, then finally sealed it and gave it to Henry. He promised to deliver it personally and to answer any questions Theodore Martin might have, though they both hoped the man would simply accept the situation and move on. That evening, Willa helped Iris prepare a special dinner to send Henry off. They made beef stew and fresh biscuits, and Iris brought out a pie she had been saving. As they ate together, the conversation was easy and warm, though Willa could not help worrying about the journey ahead and what kind of reception Henry would receive in Sheridan. "Try not to fret," Iris told her as they cleaned up after dinner. "Henry can handle himself, and most men are reasonable when faced with the truth. This Theodore Martin will be disappointed, certainly, but if he has any decency, he will understand that a woman's heart cannot be commanded." "I hope you are right," Willa said. "I would hate for Henry to face trouble because of me." "Henry is facing nothing because of you," Iris corrected gently. "He is facing the consequences of his own choices, choices he made freely and happily. Do not diminish your worth by thinking of yourself as a burden or a problem. You are neither." Willa hugged the older woman impulsively, grateful beyond words for her wisdom and support. Iris hugged her back just as tightly, and Willa felt the last of her doubts dissolve. She had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them here, with people who cared about her and whom she had come to care for deeply in return. Henry left at first light the next morning, riding his fastest horse and carrying the letter in his saddlebag. Willa stood on the porch and watched him go, her heart in her throat, and did not go back inside until he was completely out of sight. The next 3 days were some of the longest of Willa's life. She kept herself busy with work, helping Iris with everything that needed doing and trying not to constantly calculate how long it would take Henry to reach Sheridan, deliver the letter, and return. Iris was patient with her distraction, offering quiet company and the occasional gentle teasing to lighten the mood. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Willa was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She stood up quickly, shading her eyes, and saw Henry riding toward the house. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. She wanted to run to him but forced herself to walk at a reasonable pace, arriving at the front of the house just as he dismounted. He looked tired but unharmed, his face dusty from the road. "How did it go?" Willa asked, searching his expression for clues. "Better than I expected," Henry said, his voice rough from thirst. "Let me water my horse and get cleaned up, and then I will tell you everything." Iris appeared with a dipper of water, which Henry drank gratefully. Then he led his horse to the trough while Willa and Iris waited with barely contained impatience. Finally, when the horse was settled and Henry had washed his face and hands, they all sat down together at the kitchen table. "I found Theodore Martin at his business in Sheridan," Henry began. "He is a good bit older than I expected, probably in his mid-40s. He seemed like a decent fellow, though I could tell he was not pleased about the situation." "Was he angry?" Willa asked anxiously. "He was disappointed more than angry," Henry said. "I gave him your letter and waited while he read it. He asked me a few questions about how we met and whether I had stolen you away from him through any kind of deception. I told him the honest truth, that it simply happened, that neither of us planned it. He accepted that, though he made it clear he thought we were both behaving recklessly." I suppose from his perspective we are, Willa said quietly. He also said something that surprised me, Henry continued. He said he had been thinking about calling off the arrangement himself. Apparently, he had been corresponding with another woman as well, as a sort of backup plan, and she had recently indicated she would be willing to come to Sheridan if things did not work out with you. He said it seemed like fate had intervened to save both of you from a marriage that might not have been ideal. Willa did not know whether to laugh or be offended. He had another woman waiting. I thought these arrangements were supposed to be exclusive. Apparently not in his case, Henry said with a slight grin. But it works in our favor. He has someone else to pursue, and you are free of any obligation. He did ask that you repay the cost of your ticket when you are able, but he was not demanding about it. Of course I will repay him, Willa said immediately. It is only right. We will manage it, Henry assured her. The important thing is that the matter is settled. You are free, Willa, free to choose your own path. I have already chosen, Willa said, meeting his eyes across the table. I choose to stay here, with you. Iris reached over and squeezed Willa's hand. Welcome to the family, my dear. In the weeks that followed, Henry courted Willa with a sweetness and sincerity that made her fall more deeply in love with him every day. They took long walks around the property in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Henry taught her to ride, putting her on his gentlest mare and patiently showing her how to sit the saddle and guide the horse. Willa taught him some of the folk songs her father had loved, and they would sing together while working, their voices carrying across the ranch yard. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss and approved. Henry had always been a fair employer and a good man, but now there was a lightness to him that had not been there before. He smiled more, laughed easier, and seemed to move through his work with renewed energy. As summer deepened and the cattle drive approached, Henry spent more and more time preparing for the journey north. It would take nearly 3 weeks to move the herd to the railhead at Billings, and it would require every able-bodied man on the ranch plus a few hired drovers. Willa dreaded his departure even though she knew it was necessary. I wish I could go with you, she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. It is hard, dangerous work, Henry said. Not really suitable for a woman. Willa finished, raising an eyebrow. I have proven I am not afraid of hard work. You have, Henry agreed quickly. But cattle drives are unpredictable. Things can go wrong quickly, and I would spend the whole time worrying about you instead of focusing on the herd. Stay here with my mother and keep the home place running. That is just as important. Willa knew he was right, but it did not make the separation any easier to accept. She had grown used to seeing Henry every day, to the comfort of his presence and the security of knowing he was near. The night before the drive was set to begin, Henry asked Willa to walk with him down to the creek that ran through the property. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape and making it almost as bright as day. When they reached the creek bank, Henry took both of Willa's hands in his and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I want to ask you something, he said, and you are free to say no if it is too soon or if you are not ready. Ask me, Willa said, her heart pounding. Willa Jane, will you marry me? Not because you need security or a home, not because circumstances have forced your hand, but because you love me as I love you. Tears sprang to Willa's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Henry Vance. I think I have loved you since the moment you offered to help me in Clearwater Creek. Henry pulled her close and kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that spoke of promises and hope and a future they would build together. When they finally parted, both were smiling. When I get back from the cattle drive, we will have a proper wedding, Henry said. Nothing too fancy, but something to celebrate with our friends and neighbors." "I do not need fancy," Willa said. "I just need you." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Iris the news, she cried and hugged them both and immediately began planning the wedding in her head. The cattle drive departed the next morning in a thunder of hooves and a cloud of dust. Willa stood with Iris and watched until the last rider disappeared over the horizon, then turned back to the house with a determined expression. "We have 3 weeks," she said. "We should make good use of them." Iris smiled. "I was hoping you would say that. I have been thinking about what needs to be done to get ready for a wedding." They threw themselves into preparations. Willa sewed herself a new dress, using fabric that Iris had been saving for a special occasion. It was a beautiful deep blue wool, suitable for a practical ranch wife, but still elegant enough for a wedding. Iris aired out the house from top to bottom and made lists of food they would need to prepare for the celebration. Word of the upcoming wedding spread quickly through the small ranching community, and neighbors began stopping by to offer congratulations and assistance. Willa met more people in those 3 weeks than she had in her entire time at the ranch, and she was touched by the warmth and acceptance they showed her. These were good people, hardworking and honest, and she felt privileged to be joining their community. The days passed in a blur of activity, and then suddenly Henry was back, the cattle safely delivered and sold. He looked thinner and more weathered from weeks on the trail, but his eyes lit up when he saw Willa, and he swept her into his arms without caring who might be watching. "I missed you," he said against her hair. "Every single day." "I missed you too," Willa said, holding him tight, "but you are home now and we have a wedding to plan." They were married on a Sunday afternoon in late August with nearly 50 people in attendance. The ceremony took place outside, with the mountains as a backdrop and the vast Wyoming sky overhead. The nearest preacher had ridden over from a neighboring settlement, and he conducted a simple but heartfelt service. Willa wore her new blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Henry wore his best shirt and a new vest his mother had made for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed Willa to cheers and applause from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed was joyful and loud, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Willa danced with Henry, with the ranch hands, with neighbors she was just beginning to know, and she felt happier than she could ever remember being. When the last guests finally departed and the house grew quiet, Henry led Willa upstairs to the room they would now share as husband and wife. He was gentle and patient, and Willa felt safe and cherished in his arms. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies and promising with their hands and lips what their words had already declared, that they belonged to each other, now and always. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Ranch life was demanding, and there were challenges Willa had not anticipated. She learned to cope with the isolation during the long winter months when snow blocked the roads, and they went weeks without seeing anyone outside the ranch. She learned to deal with the fear that came every time Henry had to ride out in a storm or handle dangerous situations with the cattle. She learned to accept that sometimes there was nothing to do but endure and trust that things would work out. But there were also joys she had never expected. The satisfaction of working alongside Henry to build something lasting and good. The pleasure of friendship with Iris, who became not just a mother-in-law but a true companion. The beauty of the land in every season, from the spring wildflowers to the golden autumn grass to the stark magnificence of winter. In the spring of their second year together, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Henry one evening after dinner, nervous about how he would react. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, and finally a fierce protectiveness that made her laugh even as tears ran down her cheeks. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Henry said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Willa. A home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. This child is just more blessing than I knew how to ask for." Iris was beside herself with excitement when they told her, immediately beginning to knit blankets and plan for the baby's arrival. The news spread through the community, and neighbor women began stopping by with advice and small gifts, welcoming Willa more fully into their circle. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa suffered from severe nausea in the early months and struggled with the physical demands of ranch work as her body changed. But Henry was attentive and caring, taking on tasks she could no longer manage and making sure she rested when she needed to. Iris hovered like a mother hen, insisting Willa eat properly and not overdo things. Their son was born in October, arriving in the middle of a cold snap that turned the world white with early snow. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Iris and a midwife from a neighboring ranch. Henry paced the downstairs for hours, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards, until finally he heard the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. When Iris brought the baby down to him, wrapped in one of her hand-knitted blankets, Henry felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a surprising amount of dark hair, and Henry was terrified he might break something just by holding him wrong. "Go on up," Iris said, smiling through her own tears. "Willa is asking for you." Henry climbed the stairs on shaking legs and entered the bedroom to find Willa propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and showed her their son. "He is perfect," Willa whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, never quite settling on anything. But looking at his son's face, Henry knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said, "after your father, Thomas James Vance." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that?" "Your father gave me you," Henry said simply. "It seems only right to honor him." As their son grew, the ranch prospered. Henry proved to be an excellent cattleman, and with Willa's careful management of the household finances, they began to build real security. They expanded their herd, improved their stock, and gained a reputation for honest dealing that brought them good prices and steady customers. When Thomas was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps just because her body was more prepared. Their daughter was born in the spring, a calm and peaceful baby they named Sarah, after Henry's grandmother. Iris thrived with grandchildren in the house, spending hours with them and teaching them everything she could. She was in her element, surrounded by family and purpose. Willa often found her in the garden with both children, Thomas tottering around pulling weeds while Sarah slept in a basket nearby, and the sight never failed to make her heart feel full. The years passed in the rhythm of ranch life. The cycle of seasons, the endless work, the small triumphs and occasional setbacks. Thomas and Sarah grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough to hold a bucket or scatter feed for the chickens. Willa sometimes thought about the life she had almost had, married to Theodore Martin in a town she had never seen. She felt no regret, only a deep gratitude that fate or providence or simple chance had led her to get off at the wrong stop. That one mistake had given her everything that mattered: a husband she loved deeply, children who filled her days with joy, a home that was truly hers. Henry often said he had known the moment he saw her that she was meant to be his, that it was fate that brought her to Clearwater Creek on the exact day he happened to be there. Willa was not sure about fate, but she knew that some things were meant to be, regardless of how they came about. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry took Willa back to the creek where he had proposed. It was a warm summer evening, and they left the children with Iris for a few hours of precious time alone. "You remember standing here with me that night?" Henry asked, holding her hand just as he had then. "I remember everything about that night," Willa said. "I remember being terrified and certain all at once. I remember thinking I was crazy to say yes to a man I had known less than a week. And now I know I was not crazy at all," Willa said, turning to face him. "I was just lucky. Lucky that I made the wrong choice about which stage to take. Lucky that you were kind enough to help a stranger. Lucky that we both recognized what we had found in each other." Henry pulled her close, and they stood together in the fading light, listening to the water rush over rocks and feeling the breeze stir the grass. So much had changed since that first meeting in Clearwater Creek, but the essential truth remained the same. They belonged to each other, and they always would. "I love you," Henry said, the words as sincere as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you too," Willa replied. "Forever." They walked back to the house as darkness fell, hand in hand just as they had that first night. Through the windows, they could see Iris reading to the children in the parlor, and the sight of that warm, golden light called them home. Their life together stretched out ahead of them, full of all the challenges and joys that come with building something lasting in hard country. There would be more children in the years to come, 3 more in fact, each one precious and loved. There would be hard times too, droughts and blizzards and the deaths of friends and neighbors, including Iris when she finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. But through it all, Henry and Willa remained each other's anchor and inspiration. They built a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of family and love, of treating people fairly and working hard and finding joy in simple things. Their children grew up knowing they were wanted and valued, and they in turn passed that security on to their own children. The Vance Ranch became a fixture in the community, known as a place where a person could find honest work and fair treatment. Henry and Willa were respected not just for their success, but for their character, for the way they lived their values every day. When they were old and their children were grown with families of their own, Henry and Willa would sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun set over the mountains, just as they had done countless times before. They would hold hands and remember the beginning of their story, the wild chance that brought them together, and they would give thanks for the life they had built. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had gotten on the right stage that day? Henry asked once. Many years after that fateful meeting, Willa considered the question seriously, then shook her head. "No," she said, "because getting on the wrong stage turned out to be the rightest thing I ever did. It brought me to you and you brought me home." "Fate," Henry said with satisfaction. "Love," Willa corrected gently. "Fate brought us together, but love kept us together. That was our choice every single day." Henry could not argue with that. They sat together in companionable silence as the light faded, and the stars began to emerge, 2 people who had taken a chance on each other, and found that the gamble had paid off beyond their wildest dreams. The story of how Henry Vance found his bride and thought it was fate became a favorite tale in the family, told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The details might change slightly with each telling, but the essential truth remained. That sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, that mistakes can lead to miracles, and that when you find the person you are meant to love, you will know it in your bones. Willa Jane, who had left Philadelphia as a desperate young woman seeking security through a practical arrangement, had instead found something far more valuable. She had found a place where she belonged, work that mattered, and a love that sustained her through every season of life. The ranch that had seemed so foreign and intimidating when she first arrived became the landscape of her heart, as familiar and necessary as breathing. Henry Vance, who had thought he was simply helping a stranger in distress, had discovered the love of his life in the most unlikely of circumstances. The woman who got off at the wrong stop turned out to be exactly who he had been waiting for all along, even though he had not known he was waiting. Their children and grandchildren would spread out across the West, carrying with them the lessons learned on that Wyoming ranch, the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the truth that family is not just about blood, but about the people you choose to stand beside through all of life's storms and celebrations. The land itself remained, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people could build when they combined love with determination. The house Henry's father had built was expanded and improved over the years, but the original structure remained at its heart, solid and enduring. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass, it seemed like the land itself remembered that day in May when a confused young woman stepped off a stagecoach in the wrong town and into the right life, well, perhaps that was not just fancy. Perhaps the land did remember, holding those memories in its soil and stones, a story of chance and choice and the transformative power of love. Henry and Willa grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They buried friends and neighbors, celebrated births and weddings, survived hard winters and dry summers, and through it all they remained each other's steadfast companion. When Henry's back grew too stiff for the hardest ranch work, Willa was there to help him ease into a new role as advisor and teacher to their sons who now ran the day-to-day operations. When Willa's eyesight began to fail, making her beloved sewing difficult, Henry would sit with her and describe the sunset in such detail that she could see it in her mind's eye. They lived to see their youngest grandchild graduate from the new university in Laramie, an achievement that would have seemed impossible in those early days when Wyoming was still a territory. They lived to see automobiles replace horses on the roads, though they never quite trusted the noisy machines themselves. They lived to see the new century dawn, full of changes they could not have imagined when they first met. But through all those changes, the essential things remained constant. Love, family, the land, the values they had built their lives upon when Henry finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, with Willa holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were of gratitude for the life they had shared. Willa mourned him deeply, but without bitterness, knowing that they had been blessed with more years together than many couples ever received. She lived another 3 years after his death, cared for by her children and grandchildren in the house that had been her home for more than 6 decades. In her final days, when she drifted between sleep and waking, she spoke often of that first day in Clearwater Creek, of a kind cowboy who had stopped to help a lost young woman, of a choice that had changed everything. "Wrong stop, right life," she whispered to her eldest daughter on her last morning, her voice thin but content. "Tell them that. Tell all of them. Sometimes the wrong path leads you exactly where you need to be." She died as peacefully as Henry had, surrounded by love and the knowledge that her life had mattered. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the grass grew green and the wind sang its eternal song, and where future generations would come to pay their respects and hear the story of how it all began. The tale of the mail-order bride who got off at the wrong stop became part of the family mythology, a story that bound them together and reminded them of where they came from. It was a story about taking chances, about being open to unexpected possibilities, about recognizing love when it appears even if it does not look like what you expected. And in that small corner of Wyoming, where the mountains met the prairie and the sky stretched endlessly overhead, the Vance Ranch continued on, generation after generation, built on a foundation of love that began with one woman's mistake and one man's kindness, and the courage they both showed in choosing each other over the easier, safer path. The land remembered, and the family remembered, and the love that had started it all lived on in every child born, every value upheld, every choice made to do what was right rather than what was easy. It was a legacy that money could not buy and hardship could not diminish, a testament to the truth that the best things in life often come when we are brave enough to embrace the unexpected. And if you stood on that hill where Henry and Willa lay buried, looking out over the land they had loved and shaped and passed on to their descendants, you could almost hear their voices on the wind, still telling each other the story of how they met, still marveling at the beautiful accident that brought them together, still grateful for every moment of the life they had built together from that chance meeting in a dusty Wyoming town so many years ago.